It is 0319 hours. The North Atlantic Ocean, approximately 412 nautical miles southwest of Iceland and 780 nautical miles northeast of the Azores. The coordinates place this patch of ocean in one of the most strategically significant bodies of water on Earth, the GIUK Gap, the acronym standing for Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom, the natural choke point through which any Russian naval vessel, leaving the Kola Peninsula and heading for the open Atlantic, must pass. It has been a contested space since the Second World War. It was the central stage of the Cold War's silent naval competition. It remains, in the 21st century, the most closely watched stretch of ocean in the world. The sea state is 4. Swells of 2 to 2.5 meters, driven by a low-pressure system tracking northeast from the Labrador Sea. Wind northwest at 22 knots. Air temperature 4 degrees Celsius. Water temperature 3 degrees at the surface, dropping sharply through a thermocline layer at approximately 200 meters. A thermal barrier that, for the submarines operating in these waters, is the boundary between visibility and concealment. USS Gerald R, all Ford, CVN-78, is the center of a carrier strike group that has been transiting northeast for the last 31 hours. She is the most advanced aircraft carrier ever built, 100,000 tons, 4.5 acres of flight deck, capable of generating 4,000 flight operations in 5 days. She is surrounded by an escort screen, 2 Arleigh Burke guided missile destroyers close in, 1 Ticonderoga-class cruiser to the north, and further out, in a geometry that is not published in any open-source document, additional assets whose nature and position are known only to the people operating them. One of those assets is USS Indiana, a Block III Virginia-class attack submarine. She has been in the water ahead of the strike group for the last 72 hours, running silent, running deep, listening. The Virginia-class is among the quietest submarines ever built. At slow speed, in the right acoustic conditions, she generates a sound signature that is difficult to distinguish from natural ocean noise. She is not easy to find. Finding her requires the kind of dedicated, patient, multi-sensor effort that only a few navies in the world are capable of mounting. The Russian Navy is one of them. The contact first appeared in the acoustic data stream at 0247, not as a clear contact, not as a definitive signature, but as an anomaly. A repeating pattern in the broadband noise that the towed array sonar, trailing 700 feet behind USS Indiana's hull, had been processing for 6 hours. The pattern was subtle. It was intermittent. It was exactly the kind of signal that a less experienced sonar operator might dismiss as biologics, the sounds of marine life, or as convergence zone noise from distant surface traffic. The sonar supervisor aboard Indiana did not dismiss it. She had 17 years in submarine sonar. She had heard every sound the North Atlantic makes, in every season, at every depth. She had heard Russian submarines before. She reported her contact to the officer of the deck. The OOD informed the commanding officer. The commanding officer came to the control room and listened to the playback. "That's a boat," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir." "What class?" "Working it, Captain." "Possibly Yasen-M." "The tonals are faint." "She's deep, and she's slow." A Yasen-M, the Kazan-class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine, Russia's most advanced undersea combatant. 8 Onyx or Caliber cruise missiles in the vertical launch cells, a torpedo suite capable of engaging surface ships at ranges the Western public rarely discusses in open forums, and an acoustic signature that Russian engineers had spent decades refining to be as close to invisible as possible. The Yasen-M is not an easy target under any circumstances. At depth, running slow, in the acoustic conditions of the North Atlantic in winter, she is among the most challenging contacts a sonar team will ever work. Indiana's commanding officer did not increase speed. He did not maneuver aggressively. He continued on his current track, at his current depth, at his current speed, and tasked his sonar team with building the contact. Not classifying it, not targeting it, building it, understanding it, developing a picture of where it was going, how fast, and at what depth. This process, called contact development, is the foundational skill of submarine warfare. You cannot act on what you do not understand. And in the GIUK Gap, with a Russian nuclear submarine potentially tracking the same carrier strike group you are assigned to protect, acting on incomplete information is how mistakes get made. For the next 31 minutes, Indiana's sonar team worked the contact with the methodical intensity of specialists at the absolute top of their professional discipline. They adjusted the towed array's depth. They conducted a series of small course changes called a sprint and drift maneuver, designed to improve the bearing rate on the contact without revealing their own position. They correlated the acoustic data against the classified library of Russian submarine signatures maintained in the system's onboard database. At 0318, the sonar supervisor updated her assessment. "Captain, I'm calling this a probable Yasen-M. Bearing 273, estimated range between 12 and 18 nautical miles. Course approximately 035, speed estimated 4 to 6 knots. She's ahead of the strike group's axis of advance, offset to the north. Ahead of the strike group, offset to the north, in the exact position that a submarine would occupy if its mission were to track the carrier, to maintain contact with the Ford without being detected by the strike group's own assets, building a targeting solution over time, demonstrating to whoever was watching the recordings later that it had the capability to prosecute an attack if a political decision ever required one. This was the gray zone of submarine warfare. The Russian boat was not going to fire. Both sides understood this. But the Russians were going to make absolutely certain that their presence was felt, that somewhere, in some future planning document, someone on the American side would have to write the words, "Russian submarine established and maintained contact with the Ford Strike Group for an extended period during the North Atlantic transit." That was the mission. And it was succeeding. At 0321, Indiana's commanding officer made his first report to the strike group. He did not use the radio. Radio emissions at depth are detectable, and in these waters, with a Yasen-M in the geometry, anything detectable is a risk. He used the extremely low-frequency burst communication system, a squeezed transmission of encoded data that lasted approximately 3 seconds and was essentially impossible to direction find with useful precision. The message reached the carrier's CIC within 40 seconds. Aboard USS Gerald R, all Ford, the message arrived in the hands of the strike group commander, a vice admiral with 32 years in naval aviation and surface warfare, and a subspecialty in submarine operations that was unusual for an aviator. He read Indiana's contact report. He sat with it for a moment. Then he picked up the classified handset that connected him directly to the submarine force's operational command authority. What followed was a conversation that lasted less than 4 minutes, was conducted in language so precise and compressed that it would be unintelligible to anyone not trained in submarine warfare doctrine, and which set in motion a response that the Russian submarine commander almost certainly did not anticipate. Indiana was not alone. 60 nautical miles to the north, in water significantly deeper than where Indiana was operating, a second Virginia-class submarine had been running silent since before the strike group left port. She had been positioned there at that specific depth and bearing as part of a pre-planned defensive geometry, a layered submarine screen designed to protect the ford against exactly the kind of threat that was now materializing. Her existence was unknown to the Russian contact. She had made no emissions, conducted no maneuvers that would create a detectable signature. She had simply been there, listening, patient, waiting for precisely this moment. At 0341, the second submarine began a slow, deliberate maneuver to the south. She was not closing the Russian contact. She was positioning herself. Geometry was everything. The Yasen-M was between the two American submarines, and over the next 90 minutes, as the submarines maneuvered with extraordinary care, the triangle they were drawing in the water, Indiana to the south, the second boat to the north, the Russian contact between them, would tighten in ways the Yasen-M's crew had no way to detect. Above the waterline, the strike group's response was equally deliberate and equally invisible to any casual observer. The Ford maintained her course and speed without alteration. Changing course now would communicate to the Russian submarine that the Americans knew she was there, which would degrade the intelligence value of the next several hours and potentially cause the Yasen-M to reposition into geometry that was harder to track. Instead, the strike group's surface and air assets began a series of adjustments, so subtle and so well choreographed that they appeared to any observer to be routine patrol operations. An MH-60R Seahawk launched from the destroyer USS Ramage at 0352. It carried a full load of sonobuoys, passive and active acoustic sensors, deployed into the water from the air, and a Mark 54 lightweight torpedo. The Seahawk crew did not proceed directly toward Indiana's reported contact. They flew a pattern that looked, on any radar tracking them, like a standard anti-submarine patrol box. But the sonobuoy drop pattern they were laying was not random. It was geometrically precise, designed to establish a field of passive acoustic sensors between the Russian contact and the open water to the north, the direction a Yasen-M might maneuver toward if she sensed she was being closed. P-8A Poseidon, already airborne from Keflavik Naval Air Station in Iceland, altered its patrol track and began a long, slow approach from the north. The P-8A is the most capable anti-submarine warfare aircraft in the world. Its sensor suite, acoustic processors, magnetic anomaly detectors, high-definition surface search radar, electro-optical and infrared cameras can process acoustic data from hundreds of sonobuoys simultaneously, building an underwater picture with a resolution that would astonish anyone who has only seen the public description of its capabilities. The P-8A crew began dropping their own sonobuoy field at 0408. Passive buoys first, then a carefully selected pair of active buoys, positioned to create a detection corridor. The geometry was closing from 4 directions simultaneously. Below the surface, 2 Virginia-class submarines were maneuvering with the patience of predators. Above the surface, a Seahawk and a P-8A were building an acoustic fence. And the carrier strike group, the prize the Russian boat had come to track, was continuing northeast at 14 knots, indifferent and unyielding, as if none of this was happening. At 0433, the P-8A's acoustic processors registered a correlation between the passive sonobuoy data and Indiana's contact report. The contact bearing updated. The range estimate tightened. And a detail emerged that changed the character of the entire operation. The Yasen-M was ascending. She had been deep below the thermocline, using the thermal layer as acoustic camouflage. But now, her depth was decreasing, from below 200 meters to somewhere between 120 and 150. She was coming up, possibly to improve her own sensor picture of the carrier, possibly to ready a communications mast for a position report to Northern Fleet headquarters, possibly. And this was the assessment the intelligence officer aboard Ford flagged immediately, because she had detected something in the water that made remaining deep feel less safe than it had 90 minutes ago. If the Yasen-M had detected something, she had not detected enough. She had not detected the geometry. She had not detected both American submarines. The P-8A crew could tell from the contact's behavior, slow, deliberate, no dramatic course changes, that the Russian commander did not yet understand the full picture of what surrounded him. But the fact that he was ascending suggested awareness of some threat. He was probing, checking. The strike group commander, watching the updated picture in the Ford's CIC, made a decision. It was a precise decision, bounded by rules of engagement and by the very specific objectives of the operation. He was not going to drive the Russian boat off. Not yet. Driving the Yasen-M away now, before the acoustic and electronic intelligence picture was fully developed, would sacrifice intelligence value for tactical satisfaction. And in the gray zone, tactical satisfaction without strategic gain is a poor trade. He authorized the next phase of the P-8A's operation, active buoys. The aircraft dropped 4 active sonobuoys in a precise pattern northeast of the contact's last known position. Active sonobuoys emit a pulse of acoustic energy, a ping, and listen for the return. They are unambiguous. Any submarine crew who hears an active sonobuoy ping knows with absolute certainty that they have been detected. The ping is not a weapon. It is a message. And the message has one meaning. We know you are there. The first active ping went into the water at 0447. 17 seconds later, the sonobuoy received a return. Range, 9.3 nautical miles. Depth, 131 meters. The contact was correlating perfectly with Indiana's accumulated track data. The Yasen-M was real. She was exactly where Indiana had said she was, and she now knew, because active acoustic physics are not subtle, that an American maritime patrol aircraft was overhead and had found her. Aboard the Yasen-M, the decision that followed was not complicated. The tactical situation had changed completely. What had been a patient shadowing operation, conducted in the comfortable ambiguity of the gray zone, had become something different. The American aircraft knew her position. The geometry of the sonobuoy field which any competent submariner could read from the pings, suggested additional assets she had not fully mapped. The carrier was continuing northeast without pause or deviation, which meant the Americans had been aware of her long enough to decide she was not a crisis, just a problem to be managed. That assessment, that calm non-panic, communicated something to the Yasen-M's commander more clearly than any weapon system could have. It said, "We saw you hours ago. We have been working you since before you knew we were here. Nothing about your presence has surprised us. And we have decided, in our complete situational awareness, that you are not going to do anything that requires us to elevate this beyond the category of routine." At 0501, the Yasen-M turned southwest. Her depth increased rapidly, back through the thermocline, back into the deep cold where acoustic detection becomes difficult again. Her speed increased to approximately 10 knots, fast enough to open range quickly, slow enough to avoid the cavitation noise that would give away her exact position during the withdrawal. She was leaving. Not in panic, not in disorder. With the professional dignity of a crew that had done their job and encountered a force that had done theirs better. The contact opened over the next hour. Indiana tracked her to 20 nautical miles, then 30. Then the contact faded into the ambient noise floor of the North Atlantic. The P-8A logged the final bearing. The sonobuoy field was secured. The Seahawk recovered aboard Ramage at 0604 and was respotted on the flight deck within 20 minutes. In the Ford's CIC, the Strike Group Commander authorized a classified intelligence summary to be drafted for immediate transmission to Sublant, to NATO Maritime Command, and to the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. The summary described the contact, the development, the active pinging, and the Yasen-M's withdrawal. It described the performance of every asset involved. It was written in the flat, precise language of military reporting, without drama or emphasis. But the facts themselves carried weight that no dramatic language could have added. A Russian Yasen-M nuclear submarine had attempted to shadow a United States carrier strike group through the GIUK Gap. 2 Virginia-class submarines, operating in a pre-planned defensive geometry, had tracked her without detection for over 2 hours. A P-8A Poseidon and an MH-60R Seahawk had constructed an acoustic fence that compressed her maneuvering options. And at the moment of the Americans choosing, not the Russians, active pinging had made the operation unambiguous, had communicated the full picture of American situational awareness, and had triggered the Russian withdrawal. The carrier had not changed course, had not increased speed, had not done anything that could be described by anyone as a reaction to the Russian presence. She had simply continued northeast, surrounded by a defensive architecture so capable and so well drilled that the gray zone threat it faced had been absorbed, characterized, documented, and resolved before the carrier's crew had reason to feel anything except the ordinary vigilance of a warship at sea. The North Atlantic is the proving ground of great power naval competition. It has been since the convoys of the Second World War, since the sonar battles of the Cold War, since the first time a Russian submarine left the Kola Peninsula with orders to find an American carrier and prove that it could. The geography has not changed. The physics of sound in cold water have not changed. What has changed is the density of sensors, the sophistication of processors, the integration of assets across domains, surface, subsurface, air. into a single, unified, real-time picture. The Yasen-M's commander was not an incompetent sailor. He was the product of a serious naval tradition, operating a serious piece of military hardware, executing a mission that his service has practiced for decades. He did not find the American submarines because the American submarines did not want to be found. That asymmetry, the gap between what Russia knows it can do and what America can actually do, is the strategic reality of the GIUK Gap in the 21st century. And it is a reality demonstrated silently and without fanfare every time a carrier strike group transits these waters and arrives at its destination exactly on schedule. USS Gerald R. Ford cleared the northern edge of the GIUK Gap at 11:47 that morning. Her aircraft were on the catapults before noon. The sea state had eased to 3. The sky over the North Atlantic was the particular shade of gray that exists nowhere else on Earth. A gray with depth to it, with cold in it, with the weight of everything that has ever happened in these waters. Below the surface, USS Indiana was already repositioning. Patient, quiet, listening. She is always listening.